Welcome back to season 4, episode 2 of Life Beyond Loss, the podcast. This is a guest show where we share amazing and inspiring stories of navigating grief and loss through to healing and transformation. I'm your host, Louise Kresick, grief and loss coach, and today I'm talking to Shelley Jackson-Woodall. She's a celebrant. And if you don't know what a celebrant is, then listen on because she's going to explain all about that. But we have some really interesting conversation. This is a little bit different from the norm on the podcast because we're actually talking more about the importance of end of life ceremonies, the conversations that are deemed as a little bit taboo about death and dying. And she talks about her own experience of losing her grandparents and her first humanist ceremony, which is part of her passion around helping people to plan and celebrate end of life. So this is actually a really interesting and uplifting conversation. So please do stay tuned for this wonderful episode. Season 3 of Life Beyond Loss, the podcast, and I'm joined today, I'm very excited, I'm joined by Shelley Jackson-Woodall, who's an independent celebrant, aka Shelleybrant. I had to get that in because I love it. I love the hashtag, Shelley.
Yes, it was my husband started calling me a Shelleybrant, so I just had to go with it and use that as my hashtag.
But I mean, it's fantastic. It's very clever. So let's tell people just very briefly what an independent celebrant is, because I guess it's a growing kind of. I feel like people are understanding it more now, but there's still people maybe out there thinking, what's a celebrant? You know.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's certainly in the funeral industry, celebrants are well known and well used, but not so much in other ceremonies. So what I do is I write bespoke and personal ceremonies for life celebrations. So that might be weddings, baby naming, vow renewal, and also end of life celebrations. So they're very personal. And they're written about that person rather than just a template script and names are changed. So it's a very personal service.
Yeah, and I suppose the obvious question would be like, how is that different? I suppose we just take the funeral example. Mm-hmm. How is that different from just, having a vicar or somebody, I can't get my words out, like a creme, somebody else doing that ceremony?
Well, there's the thing with my ceremonies is because it's so personal. I can do a mix of religions. So somebody might not just be one religion. There might be no religion and don't want any mention of God or anything like that. Or they might be some like gently religious. Yeah. So they might be quite happy with a hymn and a prayer, but they don't want any kind of Bible readings, preachings, anything like that. And so I think for me, because I am not aligned to one kind of religion, that it gives people the options to choose a ceremony and create a ceremony that feels comfortable for them and their family.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I guess, can you sort of do it in any kind of venue and stuff like that? Does it have to be?
Yeah, I can. I can for funerals. It's generally obviously at the crematorium, but some people are starting to have a private family ceremony at the crematorium, and then having a celebration with a celebrant leading that separately, which is very much like kind of the after party, what they would used to call the wake. But it's very uplifting. There'd be photos around. There'd be memory books that people can write in, and it's just a very different feel for that party, really, their last party. And in terms of weddings, I can do ceremonies at any venue, so it doesn't have to be a licensed venue. So yeah, it gives flexibility. People can do it at home and just have a formal side of it rather than just a friend or a family member doing it.
Yeah, and do you think, are you starting to see that more people are sort of seeing this as like an end of life celebration, more so, like sort of maybe a shift in, you know, the way traditionally that we held funerals and things like that?
Yeah, slowly I think there is a shift. It's one of the last taboos, isn't it, talking about death? It's going to happen to all of us, whether we ignore it or not. And I think for me, it's about kind of normalizing that conversation. So it is, because it is such an important last celebration, and people are struggling with grief, and then they are having to organise something that possibly they have never spoken about with their loved ones. So they don't know whether they want prayers or hymns or rock music or what they want, and that just kind of compounds the stress and the grief at that time. Of they want desperately to do the right thing, but they don't actually know what the right thing is for their loved one. And so it's about opening those conversations, I think, and you know, people are changing slowly, but I think there's a long way to go still.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked, I'm thinking last year, it was this year, wasn't it? We did on Dying Matters Week, which is a national campaign in May time. We talked on a Facebook Live about this, didn't we? About, you know, opening up the conversation and helping and encouraging people to be able to just think for themselves what they want, and to also be able to communicate that with their loved ones. Because I think just this week I saw something actually about somebody who had not had a conversation and finding it a real struggle.
It would be just so difficult to particularly as families don't live closely sometimes, and so you do kind of miss out parts of their life. You might be involved in somebody's work life or somebody's home life or family or whatever, but you're not usually involved in every aspect. And people are so multifaceted, and what they've experienced and what they'd like celebrated. I think it's really difficult if you just don't even have a starting point of where to start from.
And is there a sort of a personal experience that you kind of draw from as well in your work, or anything that you kind of relate to yourself?
I've suffered loss, obviously. I'm at a certain age where I've lost grandparents. Thankfully, I'm trying to look for some wood to touch. I haven't lost my parents. My grandparents were all poorly for some time before, and so it was almost a relief when they did pass, because they were out of pain, they weren't suffering, they weren't in this kind of limbo life that they would have hated living in. So in some ways I think that makes it a lot easier. But for me, for my granddad, we had a humanist ceremony, which is a non-religious ceremony. He wasn't religious at all. He very much enjoyed his life and celebrated his life every day and lived life to the full And so that was the first time really I'd seen a ceremony that made sense to me, because the God bit of the ceremonies always seemed irrelevant to me really, unless it was very relevant for the person. And so that was the first ceremony I thought, actually this makes sense, and this is a celebration of him and what he liked doing. And it was a celebration as it can be at a funeral. It's always going to be difficult, but you kind of leave with a different feeling if you feel that the ceremony has been right for the person you're saying goodbye to.
Yeah. Isn't it? It's funny actually, isn't it, how I guess our experiences of, you know, in our own life, our own losses, and particularly, you know, attending funerals and so on, kind of just shapes then our beliefs about, you know, actually, I suppose, first of all, understanding what you would want for yourself and not want. Yeah. And then also just kind of, I guess, in the job that we do, just helps to, I guess, offer that little bit. Yeah. I don't know, understanding is the right word, but it's just really interesting how you're not the first person to have said that actually, you know, this experience has helped me to understand, you know, in the work that I do. Yeah. And I remember I'd been to funerals, probably the first time was when I was around about 12, 13, something like that. Yeah. And I remember that one being very, very somber, very, like, everybody was dressed in black. It was a very sad, you know, death in the family actually. But it was, and then when my mum passed away very unexpectedly, I was absolutely determined because that stuck with me, you know. Yeah. And it's like, it's not going to be like that. I'm just not having that. It's got to be, you know, yes, it was sad because it was unexpected and it was difficult, but it had to, like you say, reflect my mum, who was so full of life and all of that, you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I think, as well. People don't realise they do have a choice. There are choices out there, and certainly around funerals, if it's a sudden death and all of a sudden you're dealing with all the paperwork and the logistics of someone dying, the last thing you do is start looking around for what kind of funeral do I want them to have. It's almost like you go to the funeral directors and you're on this conveyor belt of these are your possibly 2 or 3 choices. This is the sort of ceremony you can have, and gradually that's changing, and there are some really innovative funeral directors out there and people who supply to that industry, but it's because you don't have time to research anything at that point, because the whole process is quite quick, that unless you've had conversations before, I think you would end up just going down the kind of normal route of, I'll have this box and these gold handles and these flowers, and let's go, because you can't think of anything else, you know. It's also the easy option.
It's also so surreal as well, and especially you know, you never, you know, I guess I'd been around loss and death, but you know, the first time having, at the age of 25, having to deal with my mum's own funeral was just like I don't know what, I can't even find the words. It was like a smack in the face, really, and like just so surreal to be going through that process for the first time, you know, in my life as an adult, having to make those choices, make those decisions. It's all just very blurry, to be honest.
I think that whole process is does go by in, you know, kind of a haze or a blur, particularly if you're a small family and so you haven't got people around you to support you, or some families I meet, they're just doing it on their own completely, and they're trying to deal with sorting out the house and sorting out the funeral and sorting out bills and the bank and all those things, and it just is overwhelming. So it's kind of starting those conversations before that point, so that there is a little bit of clarity. around what is wanted and expected.
And what about for you? Does this kind of, you know, doing the work that you do and your experiences in the losses that you had have like any kind of impact on the way you think about your own kind of decisions and choices and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't work with families who experience loss without kind of you reflect it on yourself sometimes, and think about the people around you. And I try really hard not to do that, because I need to give my time to the family that are grieving and not to bring my emotions into the factor. But you kind of, I will go home and certain things stick with you, and you kind of think, I'm going to have, you know, a slightly different attitude to this and that, or stories that you hear of people who weren't well and didn't go to the doctors and they should have, and now they're no longer with us. So sometimes aches and pains, you kind of think, oh, should I go and get this sorted, or am I fine? And I think it certainly made me very aware of the people around me and close to me, how having those conversations, and we always have had those conversations. I'm very lucky that we've always had very open conversations in my family, and quite often joke with my parents that, you know, if they've had something new that's quite nice, that I'm putting my name on it first before my sister does. So we've always been quite open about that, and where my mom would like to be scattered, and my dad, and things. But it does make me want to formalise that a little bit more in terms of having conversations quite, you know, what music I wouldn't necessarily know what music my dad would like. And music's such a big part of the ceremony, and very emotive and very important, and he wouldn't have hymns or prayers, so then I think the music then it becomes quite important. So I do think I've got to you know, perhaps jot some things down that perhaps we haven't, but we need to.
Yeah. Do you know, I went to a meeting on Monday, a coaches meeting, and the icebreaker question was, what music would you have at your funeral?
That's
and
amazing.
I panicked. I panicked because I was like, shit, I know all this. I know about thinking about all this stuff. I know about planning, but I genuinely haven't really thought about music.
Yeah.
And it's just, I just blurted out some really random, I think it's like Mr. Brightside by the Killers or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I do love, and is a part of, you know, my, you know, growing up. It reminds me of being at college and stuff. But it was just, I really thought, oh my gosh, yeah, there's so much actually that we just don't kind of, I guess, do we? Just sort of bob along thinking, yeah, I've got loads of time to sort that out.
That's it. And everybody hopes they have, but there are people who haven't, and it's, you know, music, and do you want flowers, and what charity would you like to support, and all those sorts of things are quite easy actually to make a note of before, and just kind of just have that little bit of help and guidance for people who are left behind trying to deal with everything else.
Yeah. So you mentioned as well about, you know, like kind of, and I can relate to this, not maybe like taking on too much of other people's stuff, bringing it home, that sort of thing. What are the things that kind of help you in your job role to just kind of, I suppose, look after yourself, isn't it? It's all about self-care, really, isn't it?
It is. And when I started my training, I was very adamant I was never going to do a funeral, because I absorb everybody's emotions, and I'm quite sensitive to people's emotions, and so I just felt that I wouldn't be able to be healthy myself and talk about funerals and death with people. And in fact, during the training and during conversations, I actually realised that because of that part of me, I would actually be really good at doing funerals. And so I have been really mindful of how I look after myself. I've started meditating a lot more, or just meditating seems like quite a big word perhaps, but just having a little bit of downtime to myself each day, just 10 minutes, just to kind of calm my mind. And I've felt that's really helped, and it helps me kind of not keep a distance from my families, because I don't, but kind of keep a professional part of me that doesn't let me kind of become drained with emotion. And also my role is a supportive role, so I can't take too much on, because I need to be strong for them. And I think that has kind of automatically, I've taken on that role. I know that I can't get emotionally fraught with things, because then I would be no good to them and I couldn't support them. And I think that keeping that in my mind as well, that however sad it is, it's actually not my emotion that I'm being sad about, it's theirs. And kind of having a very clear thing in my mind that it's not the same. You know, I can feel sad for them and distraught for them, but I don't feel sad for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's absolutely, I can relate to that. Obviously in my role, I'm, you know, working with people in their grief, and you know, it's very important, you know, especially if you are naturally kind of empathetic towards people, which I am too, and I guess that's why we do the job that we do.
Exactly.
And that it is important to have, I call it like a little bit of a protective bubble, I guess. That just helps me to, you know, absorb what I need to when I'm in the session with the client, and be with the client and walk alongside them, but then afterwards to be able to kind of release that in some way as well, because it's not mine. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And I was going to ask you actually about the supportive role that you have, because you're working with people, I guess, at what I would see if it's like on a spectrum, sort of the other end of where I am, you know, in terms of working with people. So what is, you know, the type of support and the role that you kind of have at those very early stages, and what's that like?
I think for a lot of families, quite often after the funeral director, I'm the first person that they've spoken to, you know, once they've started that process. And although it's very sad, and we have you know, we always have tears at meetings, and when I go to discuss how they want the ceremony to be and what things are important and what we're going to incorporate, there's always tears, but there's always laughter. And they share photos and videos, and you know, different things. They'll show me, get out a whole photo album, or if they did artwork or knitting or things, you know, they show me. And quite often people say it's nice to think of them before they were ill or before they died, and because that's the kind of first conversation they have about some of the nice things, you know, the reminiscing and the stories and the things that made them laugh. And so it's, by the end of the meeting, it's usually quite uplifting, because they have remembered the good times and shared some of those stories. And if there's, you know, 2 or 3 people in the room, they'll have forgotten when so and so did this, and they'll have a laugh about that. And so I think it's like, it's a positive meeting. Because it is the first time that they sit and remember those good times again, you know, not the sad time that they're in, and that's not going to go away. But just for that couple of hours that I'm with them, we look at some of the good stuff as well, and not just the sad stuff. So that's the start of helping them. I think that we are going to celebrate a life. It's not all doom and gloom, and it's not going to be perhaps a ceremony that they've seen before, like you were talking about, that kind of just sadness and an overwhelming feeling of, oh, this is awful. There is an element of the good things that happen to someone. And so that's the start of the process. And to be honest, I think at the point I see people are quite often still dealing with what's happened. They're still processing. It might not have sunk in. They might be so busy they don't have time to think. And they might be so surrounded by people that it's actually quite, they've got so much support around them that it hasn't, the new normal hasn't begun in a way. And it's often after the funeral and after those first couple of weeks that's when the normality starts. And that's when it becomes more difficult, I guess, when everyone goes back to their normal life and they're left with this different life that doesn't look like it did before, and they're not quite sure how to process that.
I do think, for lots of people, that's when the time that they're actually faced with their grief, because, like you say, that support, the people rallying around are all kind of very much there in the early days, and then for lots of people around them, like the funeral is almost like the closure part of it. But obviously for the family at the centre of that, it's just literally, for me, most of the time, I would say it's like the beginning of that process. And that's then, like you say, when you're sort of, and I just remember from my own experience, okay, I'm sat at home now, everyone's gone back to their normality, and you're just faced with this grief. It's like, shit, so I totally get what you're saying.
And for me, I'm not a trained counsellor. My role isn't to support them kind of past the ceremony, but I do feel my role is to signpost to services, so that I do send an email and let people know that there's additional support. I also say, if you want to phone me for a coffee or whatever, I'm quite happy to do that, because some people don't want to talk about it all over again to somebody that they've got to start the story again. So it's nice just to pick up from a point where they don't have to explain everything. And I do keep in touch with my families through through the year. So when it's their loved one's birthday, I'll send them a card. On the anniversary of the person's death, I'll get in touch with them. And Mother's and Father's Days, those times where everybody else might be celebrating, but somebody's missing in their celebrations. And so I feel it's important to, at the very minimum, to talk to them or be in touch with them at that point.
I love that. That's really nice. Like, that sort of feels like, for me, going the extra mile, which I think is really important. And I think people would really appreciate that first year of everything. It's just so difficult, isn't it? First birthdays, first Christmases, all of that stuff.
That's it. And also it's a time when everyone else is celebrating, or they should be celebrating. If they always had a family meal and then this year it's not mentioned because that person's not going to be there for their birthday, it can feel like everyone's forgotten, or it's not important anymore. And some people just don't like to mention it because they think it's going to upset someone. And so everybody kind of just, it's like the elephant in the room, nobody mentions so-and-so because it's his birthday next week. And you're not going to upset somebody by saying something. It's worse just to ignore it, I think.
I agree.
It makes it harder.
Definitely. I've talked a lot about how to respond around people that have experienced loss, and some of the things, some some real bloopers, some of the stuff people have said, but also equally this idea of not saying anything, just pretending, or let's just sort of skate over it kind of thing, or around, or even cross the street. which is, you know, it's just like, oh gosh, come on. Yeah,
personally, I think a blooper is better than nothing.
Yeah.
I'm somebody who genuinely, you know, with all the love and care they can come up with, and they say something totally inappropriate, is actually probably better than, as you say, someone turning around in the supermarket and rushing off the other way. It's, you know, and just a simple "I'm sorry and I don't know what to say."
Yeah, that's it.
It's better than nothing.
I think you're right. I think the bloopers do it the majority of time. There, of course, there are a very, very small percentage out there that might just be a little bit, you know,
it's too much.
Yeah, but I think most of the time it's from a place of love, isn't it, and wanting to sort of say something. I think the difficulty for me is that I think as human beings sometimes we want to fix things as well because of our own discomfort in situations, and of course there's nothing to fix. So I love what you said there about just a really simple, just be honest, like, I don't know what to say, but I am really sorry, you know. It's just, or even just a hug if you know the person well enough.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, more than that. I think that's perhaps what people worry about. They do want to do a big heartfelt speech, and that's not what anybody needs. Just so people know that you are thinking about them, you know, and also if you can't say it, send in a note or a card or something that just shows that they're not alone, and there are people thinking about them. And people always love to hear, you know, I always thought he was a lovely man, he was always so kind to me, you know, those little things that you don't share every day, but just, you know, recently my niece lost her granddad, and it's just things like my son said, I remember, like, he always used to take me to the factory and show me the forklift truck, like when he was little, not now he's 22, but kind of go and take him and show him round, and me telling his wife that, oh, Jake remembers this, she was like, oh, that's so lovely, yeah, that was him. And you know, it's those little things that are irrelevant in some ways, but they're just lovely memories that people share.
They are. I mean, I absolutely love hearing, even now, you know, when people come up with something about my parent, like about my mum or my dad, because it helps me to feel that I'm still connected to them as well, and you know, it's just keeping their memory alive, really, I guess, if you like. And you learn things, you know. I didn't, there's things I didn't know about my parents that people have told me, like nice things. But you know, it's just lovely to feel that connection with them, you know.
It is, definitely. And I always say in my ceremonies, you know, never be afraid to mention this person's name, because that way they continue to live on within your family, and that's really important. And also for the youngsters, you know, to hear stories about their grandparents or their great grandparents, to still have that connection, even though they may not remember them, but they're aware of them. And that way, you know, those people always continue to be a part of those celebrations and those special times.
Yes. Out of the sort of your sort of experience then of working with these families, what have you taken from that in terms of, you know, sort of tips or words of wisdom that you might sort of pass on to other people that may be listening now?
Oh, that's a hard one. Gosh, it's way too hard. Things like being comfortable with saying goodbye, and knowing when that's, you know, kind of, it's difficult not to leave things unsaid. I think the families that struggle the most are the ones that left things unsaid, and they wished they'd said things or done things even, you know. They'll be like, oh, we were going to go on holiday and we never got to it, or we were going to take the grandchildren to the zoo and we never did it. And I think that's the thing, it's the regrets, because you can't change those once somebody's gone. You can you can still do them in their memory and in in honor of them, but it's those things that you know, that they'd talked about for 10 years and never got round to, or something. I think the people that live with regrets are the ones that struggle perhaps sometimes more to get over the process, because they're living with perhaps guilt or just more sadness than they would have if they'd said things or done things that they feel they should have. And saying I love you and simple little things like that. It's never big things. It's just sometimes just the simplest of things. A kiss on the cheek as you leave. You really never know when you're going to see someone for the last time. And it's just, I suppose you've got to feel comfortable in yourself if anything should happen, that you've everything's fine, you know, as much as it can be. You know, there's obviously situations when there's family conflict and things going on that make that difficult, but even just a kiss or a blow a kiss as you drive off or something, you know, just so you feel comfortable with that.
I love that. It's like you say, it's just that idea, isn't it, that keeping in your awareness that you kind of just don't know, and like, you know, to not allow sort of, I don't know, things to get in the way of that, just to not have those regrets. And you know, just I love that. I really love that. It's something that people don't often say out loud as a you know, please make sure you do this, but actually it's just so important. And I actually, thinking about it, wrote a blog this week as I approached my 40th birthday. It was 40 years, 40 lessons, but most of the lessons that I've learned have I'll say most of it has been like after loss, because it does kind of, you know, I feel it changes you on quite a profound level. And actually one of the things in there was literally just leave nothing left unsaid. You know, just I
think that's, you know, and some people have the opportunity to say those things, but a lot of people don't. And you know, I think that's really sad. And it doesn't have to, as I say, it doesn't have to be a big gesture. It's just something little that can be done easily, and you know, as part of the course almost, you know, it's just so that you kind of feel comfortable with that. And I know some people find it difficult to say stuff, but you can text it, you can send a GIF, you can do so many things if
in
you
this
feel
day and
uncomfortable.
age. There's no excuse. Emojis, GIFs,
exactly,
whatever
there's
you
no
want.
excuse.
Oh, thank you so much, Shelley, for joining me today. It's just been absolutely wonderful. It's been a really valuable conversation, I feel.
My
is
pleasure.
there anything that we might be able to share with people that might help them with the practical kind of tips around, you know, thinking about their own wishes? Have you got anything that you can maybe give them, a link or anything like that you recommend?
Well, I haven't at the moment, but I am involved in a project that's called Living Funerals, and it's literally just been launched at the moment. And so when I get that information, I can send it over to you. But it's about people getting down their information onto a platform, and they can keep changing it as much as they want. It's completely free, and it's about starting those conversations and kind of storing and recording that information that's important to them for their own ceremonies. And as I say, it's very early days, but it will be something I think will be really useful to a lot of people that perhaps can't have that conversation, but they can leave the information for somebody else to find it. And so yeah, I can send you that information over once I have all that set up.
Brilliant. That sounds absolutely fantastic. So we'll definitely pop the link on the podcast when we've got that for you. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So where can people find Celebrant?
Well, my weddings and stuff are on my website. Baby namings and all those occasions are on my website, which is SJW Celebrant. And then my funeral work is on my Facebook page, which is Celebrate Life. And so unfortunately at the moment they're still separate because people struggle with them both together. But yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all those wonderful social media platforms. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Shelley.
Thank you.